I think writing for me has been a very deeply personal project, and a personal also ranges to the political, to the extent that writing for me is an action of praxis. It is, all my actions are based out of reflection, so the action and the reflection happens at the exact same time. And that like, so basically when you're writing, I think, rather when I'm writing, I think I am creating something and doing something, and at the same time it's coming from a lot of reflection, which in a sense creates the present, or what it is like to be right now. It really embodies that. And so for me, in that sense, writing is a very, very personal and a very beautiful process. I write very sometimes I write very lyrically, when I really feel something, and like most of my most of my writing in that sense at that point of time comes from anger or from frustration. So I have pages upon pages on how frustrated I've been in trying to get the book published, or how frustrated I've been trying to get some other works published. Also, some kind of, you know, there's a lot of thoughts that run in your head based on some of the other questions might have had in the past. And when I write, I find that those questions somehow, the answers to those questions somehow emerge, or if not answers, some more questions emerge from the process of writing. And so I also find writing to be such a fascinating process because things continuously emerge. It's you go in with a framework of what you want to write, but then as you're writing, a lot of things automatically come in the flow of what you're doing. uh, New ideas come, new connections come, new ways to tie arguments together, new ways to connect characters together, all of that, new ways to find links, all of that comes through when you're writing. And maybe when you're writing, the entire old process you thought about completely changes, uh, which again is such a intrinsic process. It teaches you to be humble, it teaches you to, even though you may think you know yourself, there is always something that may surprise you. So never have the complete arrogance and the confidence that you know something. Always approach things with the question, and those are some of the things that writing has taught me. And it's why I think it is the one project that I will always hold on to. It's always something I'll keep going back to, irrespective of what I'm doing in with my time and in my life.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Closet Writer Chronicles. I'm your host Sangeeta, aka the Moody Marshmallow. You just heard our guest for today, Vishal Vasanth. Vishal currently works with the Madhi Foundation as a senior manager, helping the government of Tamil Nadu implement model schools in each district. He is a graduate of the Harvard Graduate School of Education with a master's in international education policy and has previously worked as a political consultant. Before that, he had an education based startup called Warhorse. He's also just finished his first book, The Smart and the Dumb: Stories on the Politics and Purposes of Education in India. We chat about his professional journey, his book, and his views on education. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Closet Writer Chronicles. This week I have with me Vishal Vasanth. Welcome to the show, Vishal. It's so good to have you here.
It's an absolute pleasure. Very glad to be here as well.
Okay, so kind of just to, sort of dive right in, I think the first question I want to ask you is what is your earliest memory of writing or even just being creative?
Hmm. So I think it goes back. I mean, obviously, earliest memories would somehow relate to school, but I also always look back at my schooling at this as a very at the same time it was very creative, but at the same time it was very repressive as well. And I wanted to be as expressive as possible, but being being a fairly studious kid, but and my parents also giving a lot of emphasis to academics, I felt it was quite repressive. Actually, my foray with writing was more through speaking. When I was in school, I took part in a lot of debates, in a lot of MUNs, in a lot of quote unquote cultural programs, which like included a lot of public speaking and stage based oratory and all of that. Uh, So I used to write stuff for that and then perform it on stage. So for the longest time, my writing was influenced by how much I would speak.
Okay.
uh, and then, I mean, then after that the transition has been quite different. But it was, for me, writing was always about how I spoke, because I took part in a very, very uh, diverse kinds of events with respect to oratory and debate. Like, I traveled to different parts of the country to do MUNs. I used to teach children. I used to teach public speaking and all of that. So my writing was always influenced by how I spoke. And then uh, it was a very conscious shift to move away from that as well.
Oh, that's really interesting to hear that, that's what influenced your writing in the beginning, because I know for a lot of people, it actually starts with books or reading, right? And I'll come to that because I know you are an avid reader. You do enjoy reading. I'll always see you posting about some book or the other on your social media. So then how did you kind of get into books and reading, and how did you, build that habit?
So, which is where, I mean, that I would go back to the answer I gave before also. So because I was a very, I think inherently I was a creative child. I was encouraged to be creative at school by my parents, although, but at the same time I was encouraged to not do all of that as well. So one, and where I think the two things come in between is reading. It is an activity that really fosters creativity, but also in very conservative parents' eyes, like, you're like, oh, okay, you're doing a good job, like, okay, like you're doing something productive. Or for not conservative parents, but conservative society, you're like, okay, you're doing something productive. So I used to read a lot as a kid. Like, my nose would be inside a book like most of the day. And then I also grew up as the internet grew up. I passed out of school in 2012 when data was finally, catching on. So when the internet came, and then my reading took a hit. And then a little later, like maybe like 5 6 years ago, I realized, like, how do I not? I mean, that was the habit that I perhaps identified the most with as a child. I've kind of, I suppose, felt comfort and a sense of belonging when I read a book. I mean, it's of course on reflection, but then I started getting back into it slowly. In the beginning, it was quite hard actually to start reading. I was the first year I decided to get back on a reading habit. I perhaps did like 3 books over the course of the year, and in between, to like feel make myself feel better, I read Harry Potter again, like the last 2 books. So I was like, yeah, I read 2 more. But I mean, yeah, they're great, but I mean, I suppose it did help the reading habit. But yeah, like, it was really hard in the beginning, and then, the process goes on as you engage in it.
But then did you like really like start getting into, I guess, books in college, or like after that? Was there like a certain phase where you saw yourself kind of getting more into kind of consuming books?
Oh yeah, so in college I was a very angry kid.
Okay.
I was an angry and frustrated teenager and a young adult. I did not like college. I did engineering, and for somebody like me, that was not anything closely related to what I wanted to do. I don't know why I did it. I just, like, perhaps went with the flow. But in college also, yes, there was reading, but not a book based reading of sorts. I was reading for debates and MUNs, and, like, preparing for those speeches I would have to make, or, like, reading some reports or like news articles or something along those lines, to collect information on that. But that's all it was limited to in college. College was dreary enough that, like, you had to wake up at 5:30 in the morning, catch your college bus by 6 a.m., reach college at 7:30, on a very rickety bus through OMR in Chennai, and then the same 2 hour return back. Can't do. And then by the time you come back home, you're just frustrated and, like, yeah, like, done with this. Let's go to sleep and begin the next day again. That's what college life was. So yeah.
Okay, then. So then I'm assuming reading then just came back later, I guess, after
Yeah.
college. Yeah. Which is great. So then, who are then some of your favorite writers, and which books have you really kind of enjoyed, while growing up? And these can be like really anything, either something that's really influenced you when you started reading or kind of consuming books, or even just otherwise, or even outside of that. Do you have any like favorite writers or content you enjoy?
I mean, that answer. would be very different from who was my or some of my favorite writers when I was a kid and who it is now. I mean, I have many answers for who it is
Yeah.
now.
Oh, your
When I was a kid,
all-time favorite.
oh, that's very difficult. It's very difficult. I wouldn't. I think answering that question would do injustice to the question and to the answer itself. But of late, like I think Perumal Murugan is a author that is just like really captured my imagination. I've been for some very interesting reason translated Tamil short stories really have my attention.
Okay.
It's my go-to read over the last year and a half. So I have read all most of Perumal Murugan's translated works. Then there is Imayam. There's this fantastic book called Video Mariamman and Other Tales, which is a translated work. Then there's Jaymohan and those like just I think reading the translations of it while being so rooted in the Tamil context, just so fascinating. And yeah, I've been tripping out on that a little bit over the last year and a half. I don't read it very actively because each short story takes a very it takes a toll on you because it's so hard hitting. So you read a story, marinate, let it ruminate in you for like a few weeks, and then get back to another story again. So it takes me like 6 months to finish a book of short stories.
Wow.
Whereas if I'm to read a non-fiction novel, I can perhaps do it in like 3 4 days, but that takes me 6 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
But then, like, who are the others? Like, what are other books you've then enjoyed, even say in the recent past, or like writing you enjoyed?
So I read a lot of because of the nature of my work and what I would like to do, being a researcher and doing a PhD hopefully soon enough, is that I read a lot of academic work related to my projects, to the research projects I'm engaged in. But apart from that, I do really enjoy the genre of narrative nonfiction. So Samanth Subramanian, who's written some of the most fascinating journalistic works, I think. Like he's written a book on Sri Lanka after the war. One of the books that influenced me the most in what I do is a book called Following Fish that he wrote back in 2011. It's a 150-page book of like it's a travelogue of him traveling to every coastal state in the country eating fish and
Oh,
writing about how fish and culture intersect. And it's just absolutely fascinating. In fact, like I think it's been a fundamental influence in the work that I've done. Uh, so Saman Subramaniam. There are a few other authors, journalists whose work also is very interesting. There's this his Twitter handle is Journo Hardy. He's forget his name doesn't come to mind right now, but he's written this fascinating book on the hunger crisis, the farm crisis, and the state of hunger in India. There's this author called Kavitha Rao, this journalist called Kavitha Rao, who's written this very interesting uh, journalistic account on the man-made drought crisis in central Maharashtra, in the Marathwada region, which is basically very arid, falls in the rain shadow. So we have very interesting works like that, which kind of basically take a journalistic. What I've been really enjoying reading is these journalistic accounts which document specific aspects of culture, which tell stories that otherwise will not really find a form to be told. And more importantly, documents the day-to-day life of people and gives it a voice and some form of agency as to what sort of human beings they are, how is their day-to-day life made, how is the notion of self created. uh, that's some really interesting work. It's very related to what I want to do as well, so uh, been following that very seriously for a while.
no, that's really cool. And honestly, thank you for the book recommendations. I think I'm definitely going to check some of those out. And it was so interesting because when you were actually talking about it, I was just thinking, even say from my recent reading list, because I've been, I think, kind of veering more towards nonfiction recently, but more of, I think, like creative nonfiction or somewhat narrative nonfiction. Like, say, for example, I read Onam in a Nightie by Anjana Menon, which is her account of, Kerala through the lockdown. And she kind of talks about different like socio-political things or even just cultural things of her time, while she was there. And for me that book was just something else. Like, it was done so in a very wholesome way, but you were getting so much information out of it about a place. Or even say like a book like Shadow City by Taran Khan, which again was about her time in like Kabul. So like, I was really just thinking, I was like, oh my god, yeah, actually, nonfiction really has a way of kind of translating or sort of, I guess, transferring certain information to you through storytelling, which I think is great. So can completely relate with you on that. um but yeah, coming, I guess, more towards your professional side of things. So I know you started pretty much as an entrepreneur with Warhorse, which again kind of had education in the sort of core of it. And then you kind of properly moved into the education space. Of course, you were a political consultant in between, and we'll kind of get to that later. But I really want to ask, what kind of made you decide to get into education, and what is it that you really see yourself doing, and what are you currently working on, and do you like your work? How is it going for you? Yeah.
Sure, sure. Yeah, that's. I suppose education has been at the very core of everything I have done for the last 10 years or so. It's a journey that's both deeply personal and I also say deeply political. And I'll tell you why I think that. When I started Warhorse, I was actually 19. I was in college, and like I said, I was a very frustrated and angry teenager. And I was so pissed off with what was happening in college and what that education was like. I was like, you know what, like instead of me sitting in college, just being angry and getting depressed, because I really felt like my mental health was taking a real nosedive at that point of time. And I was like, I cannot let myself like allow myself to be buried in that. Like I'm have to try to do something, and I had all the energy to do that back then. I'm not so sure about it now, but I get so when I was 19, I was like, oh, let me go teach public speaking and debate to school kids, because I thought it was a I saw my classmates really struggling with the idea of communication, of being confident and getting on stage and speaking and all of that. And I saw that maybe it was a good market opportunity. I always saw it back then. But I saw education as a market opportunity back then. I was basically teaching public speaking and debate to multiple middle school and high school children for a while. And then after I finished college, decided to scale the company, made it got a much larger team. We had like a team of 12 people at its highest, where we were basically we were across different parts of South India. We were teaching public speaking and debate, but using public speaking and debate to teach history, philosophy, economics. We're basically building gamified classrooms where children would come to our classes to build a country from scratch. So the pedagogy was very unique. The content, our students absolutely loved it. But for me, there was always a thorny issue which was always in the back. One was that my clientele were very elite. I had the who's who of Chennai as my students, the children of the who's who of Chennai as my students, and it was, I mean, no issues with that at a basic level. But then the more I started thinking personally as to why I'm doing this and what I want to do in the future, I figured, like, this is not the project of education that I want to be in. Absolutely, uh, no offense or no issues with no offense meant or no issues to people who are pursuing education in whatever way they deem fit. But for me, it was not the project that I wanted to engage in. I thought, like, maybe my energy, my intelligence, and my energy and my strength can all be used in different avenues of education. And I thought that policy would be a very interesting space, because I think for some reason many policy students and policy makers are in the thirst of some kind of then the journey of finding some kind of power to influence, or at least that's what informs decisions at the beginning, in my experience. And I was a cut of the same mold also. I was like, oh wow, like maybe what I can do can have an enormous impact on a lot of people. And that's how I decided to study policy as well. I did a so I applied to do masters in public policy or education policy in different universities, and I got into Harvard, and there I studied education policy. The master's was on education policy, and I think for me that was a very fundamental, it was more than fundamental, foundational point in first unlearning enormously whatever I had learned. I went in and came out as two very different people. That's where I learned to read. When I say I learned to read, I actually really mean that, in that I started to be able to critically understand what people were writing. I was trained to understand positionality. I was trained to look at education as a political regime. Uh, I was, and I was also, I was influenced to a degree to think that education is perhaps one of the most political tasks of them all. So whatever I did, so I stopped by the time, but 25% into the course, I realized that maybe more than studying policy, I would much rather study philosophy. And so I started studying the philosophy of education. I started studying political philosophy, critical theory, which really had a significant effect on first understanding who I was, where I came from, what were the dynamics of power, of oppression, how was my identity created, how do I want to identify myself in the future, how do I want that to come out in the work I do, and like how to be creative as an educator. These were all things that were like, which was continuously part of the environment at Harvard and during the course. And it's shaped my idea of being a writer, it shaped my idea of being a researcher, it shaped what I want to work on as well. And I think to answer the question, I mean, you perhaps getting there about being a political consultant, I started this job as a political consultant immediately after my time at Harvard, which was
Right.
around 2.5 years ago. It was very interesting that I mean, I was looking to work to get back in the education space, but for my inclination at that time, and it still remains so, that education was a very political project. I was like, let's work in electoral politics and kind of understand that realm of things, because I knew I could always get back into education if I wanted to. So it was a conscious decision. I was like, yeah, and it was the job was back in home in Chennai with the DMK, a party that I have very strongly believed in for a very long time, despite all its flaws. Rather, I believed in the Dravidian movement, and I also worked very coincidentally. I worked at the Tamil library at Harvard
Okay.
uh,
Interesting.
during my time there. So I was cataloging all of these really old Tamil books, starting like from Sangam era literature, like cataloging manuscripts, to dealing with Sangam literature, translations of it, and then Western scholars' interpretation of the Tamil language, and then books on Tamil nationalism. As I was cataloging, I was reading it as well. So I'd spend 4 hours in the library, 3 hours of it I would read, and then 1 hour of it I would catalog and say, "Hey, look, I work for 4 hours." Uh, but yeah, so all of that really informed my decision. I was like, let's go try and be a political consultant, see how politics really plays out on the ground, because I think it's very a fundamental mistake I think all of us do and have done in the past, is that we think that if we push someone into some educational activity, they will come out a different person. So we're basically looking at education as an input and output mechanism, or what Freire calls a banking model of education, or like basically a very industrialized model where like you put a bunch of inputs and then a finished product comes out. Uh, and I wanted to see what were the other factors that really influenced education. So I was very driven. I continue to be, and I have for a long time been driven by questions.
Hmm.
Um, not, I don't know if I've been in search of answers, but it's just a question that's like really driven a lot of the decisions that I have made. So this was also a question which was like, let's see what are the other factors that really affect education. And for me, being a political consultant was a good way to get an in,
Okay.
and see what really happens. But also at the same time, of course, from a very technical and a professional lens, I was very interested in politics. I still very much am, in electoral politics rather. So I worked with very senior leaders in the party who are currently ministers. I was helping design and manage their election campaign. I was also doing some research, policy research on the side to inform electoral campaigns and all of that. But then, yeah, I mean, the election got done, and then there was no need to stay on anymore, so I moved on.
Yeah, and you currently work at Madi Foundation?
Yeah, I do. I work with this organization called the Madi Foundation, which works with the government of Tamil Nadu in being a project management partner for multiple massive projects that the state is doing. So I am the project manager for one specific project, and that called the Model Schools program, where basically the state wants to create one model school in every district in the state. So this year we're doing 25 model schools, one in each district, with the idea of providing high quality infrastructure, top quality teaching, and getting the most quote unquote meritorious of students within these schools, so that it's a very conducive environment, and then combining it with career guidance, mentoring, good co-scholastic activities, and top notch training basically to help them get into premier institutions in India and abroad. So it is approached in the way of a poverty alleviation program, so that like if kids can get into places like IITs, NITs, DUs, or national law universities, for these government school students who come from very oppressed backgrounds, it is one of the fastest ways out of poverty. So it's approached very pragmatically, and which is rather interesting for somebody who spends a lot of time reading and writing and thinking and being very idealistic. Being in a very very pragmatic environment is a continuous challenge, and it's something I navigate through every day. But yeah.
No, but it's amazing that, you're getting to work on something you're so passionate and driven about, right? And where I think social impact is really also kind of at the core of it, because you're really getting to change lives over a period of time, and I think that kind of does make all the difference and go a long way. So more power to you for that. Um, but yeah, were there ever any misconceptions you faced, be it with working in politics, though you were working as a consultant, or even just with your work in education? Have you ever faced any kind of like strange or ridiculous assumptions or misconceptions, and are there any instances you can share?
Mhm. No, all the time. I think it's assumptions by nature. I mean, I suppose there are so many assumptions with which people operate in these domains that like it mostly tends towards being ridiculous, but at the same time also you understand why it's so ridiculous. So it's always like you're like stuck in a very curious dilemma, like, oh my god, this is crazy, but yeah, it makes sense that it's crazy. That's how it mostly is. Like, um to share, I mean, some of the most obvious instances relate to caste and gender.
Mm.
uh, like, it's been even in the work I do today, they people assume that the most well-meaning educators in different parts of the state still assume that, like, oh, why do we have to give this girl, why do we have to focus on this girl so much? Like, she'll get this engineering degree, sure, but then after that they'll get her married. So எதுக்கு இவ்வளவு like in Tamil they'll be like, why do I have to put so much effort? That's a assumption that runs all the time. Another assumption that runs all the time is that, like, scheduled caste or scheduled tribe students have it really easy. It's like, oh, these guys will get into IITs anyway based on like whatever little marks they get, is the continuous assumption that
Mm.
goes on, which is not, I mean, it obviously takes away a lot of the humanity, and it takes away a lot of it's very problematic to think in that manner. But these assumptions are also so ingrained, and they're so deeply endowed in most aspects of society, at least Indian society. I think it's a mistake to think that, like, oh, it's there only in in particular spaces, in particular geographies, and all of that. But in my work as a political consultant, and also here doing this job, like, continuously reinforces that, like, it's a myth to think that it exists only in certain spaces. It's like really there all along us. And uh, I suppose to tackle these assumptions is perhaps one of the most fundamental projects of what education should do. And that's also been quite the it's informed my work also, to actually think like, why are people assuming this and why is it so widespread.
Hmm.
I mean, but these are some examples. It goes. I mean, it really depends from context to context. Also, some of the assumptions are nice. Some of the assumptions are not so nice.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah,
Have you faced any assumptions about, like, say, your career path in
oh,
this?
all the time, all the time. From so many different. My parents think that I'm a drifter.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
the notion is that I do not have a clear path because I was an entrepreneur working in for-profit education, and then I was worked in politics, and now I'm back in education policy. Like, what are you doing? None of the it in my head it makes all the sense. It's a path driven by curiosity. There's a lot of questions, also with a lot of innate self-confidence that I can figure out something if I want to. But yeah, these are some and also the assumption is that, oh, you're, for example, another assumption I face all the time is like, oh, you're from Harvard, so you have all the answers to all the problems.
Oh, wow.
And
Okay.
yeah, this is a common thing that supposedly my peers and my colleagues at Harvard also face. Like, like, oh, you are the Harvard dude, so you should know everything. I'm like, dude, have you seen me? I'm so confused all the time. But like the confusion, I'll always keep going back to, is driven by the questions. It's driven by the curiosity. So it's certainly an absolutely ridiculous assumption to think that I know things, or I have answers to solutions. I may have an informed guess at perhaps 2 out of 10 things, but yeah, or I can like, or I can backward rationalize a lot of things. That's what you I can do, I suppose. So to give answers is not my cup of tea.
No, but I love that. It's like, oh, you're from Harvard, so you know everything.
Yeah,
There's
yeah, yeah.
nothing you shouldn't know. It's almost like you don't have the license to not know anything. You have to know
Yeah, yeah, they're
everything.
like, what? Like, yeah, exactly. They're like, but how? Like, this is what we hired you for. I was like,
Oh my god, that's hilarious. That based on your education, you're like, you know, you need all the answers. I
that's
love
what
that.
it signals, doesn't it? That's what education performs. That's the function it performs. One of the significant things that education or the credential does is that it signals to the market that, like, hey, this person is of this particular quote unquote caliber, or is of this particular pedigree, or whatever you'd like to call it.
Hmm.
Credentialism is a very difficult rope to work with.
Hmm. That's interesting. That's fascinating. No, really. But yeah, then what is your experience, since we've mentioned Harvard so much? What has your experience been like actually being in that sort of Ivy League environment? What has, I guess, that educational environment or space, I think, done for you? And do you think um like it truly is the best, as they say, in terms of, I'm talking about education, and this thing? And do you think that truly other universities need to like catch up and like do something different, or what is Harvard doing that the other universities or education institutions need to learn?
Sure, sure. Wow. I mean, I'll try to be brief about this. I don't want this to be a podcast about the pros and cons of
Obviously.
Harvard. But to be very specific, I think I must contextualize my answer to your question. I went to this particular school at Harvard called the Graduate School of Education. So Harvard's a university with like multiple different graduate schools and then their undergraduate program. I went to this specific school called the Graduate School, Harvard Graduate School of Education, where the environment, I really believe, is like no other. Most of most of American universities, and most universities that take for the form of a Western liberalized or a neoliberalized education pattern tends to be very competitive. But the Graduate School of Education stood out and very firmly believes in standing out that it's a very cooperative space. It was an environment of like the entire cohort where there were around 700 students divided into master's program, out of which 650, 660 would have been teachers, uh, who have been teachers for a very long time. Like I was like, including myself, like I taught for 6 years. when lot of I but I didn't necessarily teach as a school employee, but I interacted with hundreds of school children through for 6 years, and then there were so many other school teachers, school principals from 70 different countries. So it was an atmosphere like driven through by empathy, by a common cause to do better for the children and the societies we work with, in understanding the in continuously debating and understanding what the power of education is, and how and what this responsibility of being an educator means. So this continuously driven by those questions. And teachers are actually super fun loving people. A lot of We had a great time, the multiple parties, just hanging out and talking, discussing life, and like understanding how education and life are so similar. I mean, I'm sure a lot of other people do that, but here the important thing was that it was a very very empathetic and a cooperative space. There was never any tweak of jealousy or any of that. And at the same time, the academics was super rigorous, and the courses that I chose to take were very philosophically driven. Most of the courses I took were philosophically driven, and Harvard is really one of the birthplaces of Western philosophy. Uh, at least in the US, there's like phenomenal work, a lot of political philosophical work has come out of that. And it was to engage with those texts, to speak with those people who have worked on these books and these texts for as a career, like really it has a very powerful impact. But most interestingly, I think what really makes Harvard a very unique place is a legacy of having some of the brightest people on earth in one place. And by brightest, I don't mean like they're the most
Yeah.
intelligent. These are people who are extremely driven and who have a very very clear vision of what they want to achieve. And even if you don't have the most clearest of vision, if you come with some form of vision, the idea of the university is to help shape that vision for you to go engage in whatever you want to do. So you are continuously surrounded by phenomenal people. Like you can walk up to a Nobel laureate's room and like have a coffee and a conversation, if they have the time. The classes are super rigorous. There are events after events, like 10 events happening every day, and you mostly live on FOMO. Like you can go for one, but you have to compulsorily skip nine other.
Hmm.
So these events include uh, open mics to book launches to plays to musical performances to talks by Nobel laureates and like professors talking about their research and all sorts of things. So it's a very intellectually driven atmosphere, which is what I think makes it really interesting. And you have to read and write a lot. So when you read and write a lot, as compared to I think Indian education, barring a very few select universities where you have to memorize or like you have to absorb, you have to basically study a lot. Here you have to read, contextualize, internalize it, understand what it means for you, and then really, I wouldn't even say reproduce it. You have to kind of create something out of what you read and understood.
Hmm.
And that's the process that really creates the a churn within. But that also doesn't go to say that like those who don't have that kind of educational experience, it doesn't mean that they can't do it.
Yeah.
It's just a accelerated and a very expensive way to go through that process. That's all.
Yeah, no, for sure. But speaking of reading and writing, you just wrote your first book, which is a collection of narrative nonfiction stories, I believe. So, how did that happen? What kind of drove you to write that? What was the spark, and what has the process of writing it been like for you?
Sure. The spark actually, I don't have a very specific individual answer to that. I think ever since started reading again after I finished my undergrad, I was like, damn, like this is the enterprise, an endeavor that speaks the most to me. That's something I really, really wanted to do. That is to like write, but I had no idea, obviously, what to write or what to do. Uh, and I was also busy working and teaching all that, so I couldn't really engage in it. But then when I decided, okay, like let's I think teaching as a process, I mean, the startup that I was running may not necessarily be what I want to do. It's like I think I really want to get back into this original endeavor that has always excited me the most. So, and I was also massively influenced by Samanth Subramanian. He That book, that book, Following
Hmm.
Fish, uh, was a actually has been a pathbreaker in many ways. It also won the Sahitya Academy Award and all of that. Uh, and I was like, damn, I didn't even know that. When I read that book, I was like, couldn't even imagine like something like this was possible. It is so simple, but also so effective, and it really speaks to a lot of unanswered and unthought of questions which really lie deep within you. And I was like, I really think, like, an endeavor on this, on education, would be so interesting. So I started thinking a lot about it, and started speaking to people about it. And in fact, before I left for Harvard, I traveled for 6 months across the country. I was in Nagaland. I was in like in interior Rajasthan. I went to a school that taught only music in like Dharwad in Karnataka. I visited like model panchayats in Kerala. I was in Amritsar. I was in a tribal village in Orissa. Just like speaking with people, trying to speak with people and understand what education means to them. What are they trying to do to provide whatever they consider education, and how they think it's helping the people who they're trying to help, or if they're making money out of them, and all of that. I also spent quite a bit of time in Delhi, speaking to very interesting academics, bureaucrats, and all of that. So uh, that trip which I did before Harvard, I went, actually, I was like, okay, like I went all ignorant and arrogant, thinking, okay, you know what, I'm gonna get everything I need for this book through, like, I'm traveling for 6 months across like 18 states, so I was like, I should be able to do it. Then I came back like 3 months in, I was like, I don't know anything. uh, and like, this is not going to be whatever I write. First up, I couldn't, like, nothing even came out. I couldn't even write anything. Like, this really, like, I have to park this project for a while. I was like, let me go study more and really think about what I want to write. And that, so I actually, my reason for doing philosophy and like studying philosophy at Harvard and approaching education, the course, the way however I did, was actually completely anchored in the book. It was a question. The My time at Harvard was driven by an anxiety that, like, oh shit, in a year you have to get a job, and kind of make do with like this massive financial investment that you made to do this masters. And at the same time, I really need to use this time to figure out what to write for my book, or rather, what frameworks to base my writing on. Uh, and and then I came back, and then even after I came back, I was like, I'm still not ready. After I finished my time being a political consultant, was when I was like, I need to travel all over again. And like, this time I'm fairly a little bit more equipped. So this book's actually been in the making for around 4 years now.
Okay.
So yeah, from the time the idea started and the groundwork for it started to the time I completed writing the book in March this year, it's a 3.5, 4 year journey.
Wow.
So yeah,
So what can you tell us about the book? Like, we know.
I can tell you everything.
Oh, that.
I can tell you everything because I don't know whether the book will ever get published. So the opportunities I get to talk about it, I'm most happy to share.
Please, please do.
Uh, yeah. So the book is collect, like you said. I finally found a title also. The book's called The Smart and the Dumb, and it's a collection of stories on the politics and purposes of education in India. So one of the fundamental questions, again, I approached the writing of this book with is, how does education affect culture, and how does culture affect education? Um, so my story, the chapters that I've written include a story on how child marriage, how education is causing child marriage in Rajasthan.
Okay.
So I attended like 2 or 3 child weddings. Like, the girls were like 13 and 14, the boys were like 17, 18. Who were all like, everybody looking super happy, hunky dory, like, full galata affair. And then, speaking with parents, with these village elders, understanding like, why are you getting your girl married off at the age of 13, like, what's your reasoning? And then, like, they talk about it. documented all those stories. Wrote a story on how a ban on toddy tapping in southern Tamil Nadu has a massive influence on the way these toddy tappers approach education. Which that chapter for me, and when I was in this district in Tamil Nadu called Ramanathapuram, near Thoothukudi, which is a different district, but very close to the city of Thoothukudi, where I was doing research for this. There are a lot of palm trees in the area, and so it's a age-old profession to climb these sometimes 40 to 60 foot tall palm trees, and tap the sap that comes out of a particular part of the tree, which then if you allow it to ferment becomes alcoholic and absolutely delicious. I love toddy. So tapping toddy and selling it has been a very old profession in the Tamil within Tamil society, and also large parts of southern India. Uh, and I also recently found out in Goa as well. But yeah, but then back in the 70s, there was a ban on the Tamil Nadu government put a ban on tapping toddy because there was a lot of deaths because people were drinking illicit and
Hmm.
spurious liquor. But then there's also a very deeply political move as to why toddy was banned. It was also because, well, one can assume also that it was because the people who were tapping toddies were very low caste nadars, uh, and it was considered. And then one part of the nadas became very powerful, and then another subsection of the Nadar caste continue to remain in deep poverty, and these Nadars continue to be the ones who are still climbing the palm trees and all of that, and how they are approaching education. Why do they aspire to send their kids to engineering college? And the answer, I mean, for me, the answer was, what does education do? There was, it provides this notion of dignity and social respect, that like, okay, we have been low caste nadars for the longest time who have been selling alcohol, which is considered a degrading and a demeaning profession. Let me get my children out of this profession and send them to engineering college so that they, at least in society, will be considered in a respectful manner. So in that sense, education becomes the engineering degree in Tamil Nadu becomes very aspirational.
Hmm.
So I wrote a chapter on that. I wrote a chapter on my own experience doing cultural fests in school, and how notions of meritocracy and how ideas of success were ingrained through, by being very successful on stage in front of a group of very upper caste elite background children. So when, I suppose, the school I went to was a very upper caste, very closed off Brahmin institution, and the kind of schools the cultural competitions, the extracurricular activities we participated in had students from exactly the same background. In fact, like, I had such a protected upbringing that I don't think I knew even a single non-Brahmin student until I passed out of school.
Oh, okay.
That's how protected and that's how repressed uh, that sort of education was. So uh, I wrote a rather auto-reflexive piece on how my time being in culturals, and like also seeing how other people participated in culturals, was has really set the stage for how Brahmins approach caste as a topic, and as to how they are above caste or outside the realm of caste, and because they are able to have these talents and like these notions of success and merit, like, oh, we are meritorious because we study hard and come up the hard way and all of that. How it's created through these extracurricular activities. Another chapter that it's a collection of 8 chapters. I'm giving you a few examples to
Yeah.
give you a full picture. One of the final chapters of the book is also on how history textbooks have been used as a project by states across the world to create a nationalist identity within children or within students as such. So I was actually, back in 2018, I was hired by a very prominent set of institutions in Chennai, which I think, I'm not going to name
Yeah.
them, but the more I speak about them, the more you will understand what school or what kind of institution this is. They hired me to be a curriculum consultant to rewrite their history textbooks for classes 6, 7, and 8. And I was like, wow, this is such an interesting project. Thank you so much. And this was actually one of my first forms of full-fledged writing. So I was like, this is a great start to writing my book. So let me just write a history textbook and see. So I basically culled out three chapters from the class 6 and class 7 and class 8 textbook. Totally culled out nine chapters and wrote nine new chapters
Okay.
on the history of India after independence, on World War One and World War Two, on how Africa as a continent was brought forth by, like, how what we know as modern nation states in Africa was created by colonial powers, and how the borders were drawn. So basically, it was a collection of nine chapters. Uh, Depending, like, by the time you reach class 8, you would read the history of India after independence, which is a rather political history. uh, how what happened during the emergency, how did the partition come about. I wrote all of that. When I gave the first chapter of this so-called textbook, revised textbook, to the correspondent of the school, who had hired me very enthusiastically, he looked at he read the entire thing, and he's like, I have severe problems with this. He's like, firstly, why are you talking about partition? It's a topic we don't want our children to know about. I'm like, okay. And then he's like, why are you talking about Nehru? I was like, sir, we agreed that I'll write about the history of India after independence. He's like, yeah, but you don't need to include Nehru in that. Well, I'm like,
Wow.
he was the first prime minister, whether you like him or not. He was the prime minister for like 15 years. So you're like, yeah, and then you're like, you've cited Ramachandra Guha, like, you can't write anything which has Ram Guha's name. I'm like, but he's a historian as well. Like, and I'm not quoting him word to word. I'm like writing. I've cited his some of his books and some of his articles, and then it was just a back and forth all the time. And then it was, finally I finished writing. I wrote a 22,000 word textbook
Wow.
for them. They were like, yeah, no, we're not using this, and that's it, the project got done. So I wrote a chapter on that. I wrote about how using history textbooks, a narrative is created in the mind of children. I also, and the more I researched on this, it was so interesting. I spoke to Janaki Nair, Professor Janaki Nair, who's a retired professor at JNU, who was part of the history textbook reforms committee in 2005, working with the MHRD. And she was talking about how nationalism and the creation of an identity has always very closely been linked to curricula. Uh, and it's a project that politicians very, very clearly understand. Uh, and like, I'm sure you can see what's happening in textbooks across the country now as well. I don't know if, I mean, I'm not going to comment here whether it's for good or for bad, but like, the fundamental notion is that the history textbook is a tool to create an identity within children, and that is a very political project. So my book is a collection of stories on aspects like this.
No, that's really fascinating. And, I think just listening to you talk about it, I honestly want to pick up a copy and read, what you've written. I would love to, honestly speaking.
I can send you the unpublished, unedited
Please
manuscript
do.
if
I
you'd
would
like.
love to. If, so fun fact. So, and also, like, I would like to call this show a slight good luck charm in that way. But I had on season one, I had an architect who was also a friend, Ashna Lalla. So she was writing a book at the time and it was unpublished. And fun fact, it's getting published this year. So maybe, just maybe, Vishal,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
universe, if you're listening, if there's any publishing house that's listening and wants to like pick this book up, I really think you should. um yeah, but yeah, no, it sounds really fascinating, and I really do hope that this book does see the light of day, because I think it's a very fascinating subject, and I think nonfiction as it is has like a huge readership in India and globally, for sure. So I honestly can't wait to, read it and see where it goes. But yeah, now we're kind of coming towards the end of this interview, and we always end with these last two questions. So, first one being, what are your sort of aspirations, creative or otherwise? What are you just looking forward to in the near or even distant future?
Sure, sure. So, my reading and my writing today veers towards two very separate projects. One is the research that I do. So as a researcher and as a potential PhD scholar, I write papers. So I have a paper published. I just presented another paper at a conference in the UK. I'm writing one more for on the project that I'm the model schools project that I'm doing now. So a lot of my writing today is very much firmly grounded in research and in theory, which I think is absolutely fascinating for me, and it's a very, very creative enterprise. Another project that has been on my mind for the longest time, it actually came to my mind like a couple of years ago when the idea for this book was taking a little more ground, was to write on the politics of biryani or the politics of food in
Oh,
general.
wow.
So I want to do a project on maybe, but this time not just writing about it because I think people don't read at all. But maybe a more multimedia, a multimodal project on documenting biryani in Tamil Nadu. I think biryani is a very fascinating subject in itself because every different part of the state you go to, there is a very there's a huge cultural there's a cultural nuance to the biryani you eat there. For example, the biryani you eat in Tirunelveli tastes and feels different than the biryani you eat in like an Ambur
Yeah,
or a Vaniyambadi in the western part of the state. Then you will have towards more the coastal regions. And all aspects of biryani for me are somehow related to class, class and caste for sure. And I want to explore those things. For example, did you know that there is a place in Chennai near Perambur called Dasamakan, which is very famous for its beef and its beef
oh,
biryani.
okay.
It's considered to be the hotspot for beef biryani in Chennai, and it also happens to be a very much a Dalit locality. So so go figure. So there's a lot of very interesting. The food and politics are very, very closely connected. So I want to attempt, when I have the time and the mind space, some kind of work on biryani for
That's
sure someday.
amazing.
Yeah.
That's truly amazing. Um,
Another thing I had an idea on, which the project something I've currently shelved at for the moment because I don't think I have uh, the frameworks and the a proper idea on how to go about it, is to document mustaches in Tamil Nadu.
Interesting.
That if you notice, and it's something I'd ask all your listeners to actually think about as well. If you notice, only in the southern states, especially in Tamil Nadu, is the mustache is very distinct. Like Tamil men have a very thick mustache above their upper lip and are clean shaven completely. But if you look at anywhere else, mustaches are not particularly groomed that way. And people and men take very serious care of their mustaches because it has a lot to do with their notions of
Right.
masculinity, a lot to do with ideas of masculine or hegemonical power, the notion that only a mustached man is powerful, and like people who don't have mustaches like me, who can't grow a mustache, are considered quote unquote feminine or whatever, weak, or something like that. But like Tamil men have a very distinct style of mustaches, and once you start thinking about it, you'll start noticing it a lot too. You'll find every man in the state has a very, very similar mustache, just a really thick mustache above your upper lip, and that's it. No beard, no goatee, no soul patch, nothing. It's just a very thick mustache on the upper lip, some which even men have a comb in their pockets to like regularly comb it as well. So yeah, I wanted to do a photo essay of sorts on mustaches, Tamil mustaches. The title was Tamil mustaches, but like I basically have to go like find a photographer or like some kind of person who's interested in documenting this and like come with me, travel to different places and like take these photo portraits and all of that. I'll do that someday though.
Yeah, I hope
To
so
take
because these
listeners.
sound like very exciting projects, and I feel like you should definitely do them because they would be really fun to like read and just kind of know about for sure. So really hoping you get to kind of work on all of these. And yeah, final question: what is a piece of advice or learning you'd like to share with people? Can be personal, professional, or something you've just kind of experienced in your lifetime till now, and you wish more people were aware of.
Uh, I don't think I'm anybody to give advice, but I can share my a few experiences that have really benefited me. And I think this process of engaging in reading uh, this might sound very preachy, and like I've been called a boomer multiple times for this. But I really do honestly believe that the practice of reading is at the same time a practice of consuming some very interesting information, and what interestingly happens at the same time you reflect on it. And the written word has a power that I suppose the visual medium does not. The visual medium, like watching anything, is extremely powerful to the extent that it can make you relate and make you feel. uh, and it's a very democratic medium. uh, the What the written word does is it actually, in my very humble opinion, it allows you to reflect a lot more deeply, and it allows you to engage with what the author is trying to say, or what the author is trying to prove, or what the book is trying to get at. It really makes you reflect, and it really makes you want to create something out of it. I'm not saying films, TV shows don't make you do that, but they also originate from the written word.
True.
And so I suppose engaging with the written word in some form or the other. And it doesn't mean you have to read like 40, 50 books a year and read all the time. I wouldn't prescribe that at all. So just suggest to engage with it, like poetry, like a habit that has really benefited me. Something my friend suggested, like when I was just really struggling with anxiety on getting this book published, and to stay more in the moment, a friend of mine from Harvard said he reads poetry from a particular website called On Being, which is basically a collection of poetry. Every day, every week, they post a new poem, and very powerful poems on what it's like to be. So, in a sense, it's rather existential. And it talks about the little things in life. It talks about like the much bigger things in life. So, just waking up and reading that while brushing your teeth or eating breakfast in the morning for 10 minutes, it's like all these short poems. In that sense, it's you're engaging with the written word. And I find that deeply, deeply therapeutic, and at the same time informative, and at the same time extremely challenging. It keeps it the reading, engaging with the written word and reading regularly keeps me buzzing and going after questions, which I think is a very interesting enterprise to just go into, rather than going along with your day. Like, a question will inform the things you do, and that's a fascinating way to go about life. Not the only way to go about it, but I think it's a fascinating way to go about it. So my and also, for the sake of the kind of work you and I do, please read more
Yeah.
and please buy more books. So yeah,
Yeah, I think publishers are going to love you more for this answer than anyone else. But no, I do agree. I think there is something very special about the written word that no other medium can really do. I know people say that print is dying, but I think it's just becoming a lot more niche. And hey, reading's always been cool. So I will always advocate for books, on the show or otherwise. But yeah, thank you so much for being here, Vishal. It was so great to talk to you and kind of, hear about your journey and your book and everything that you're doing. More power to you. I hope you're really able to kind of go out there, do whatever it is you want. And hopefully, I will see you back for another season, maybe at some point when the book is out. I would love to chat with you. But
I'll hit you up myself and be like, let's do this, because you were the catalyst.
yeah, for sure. But no, really, thank you so much for being here. I hope you had a fun time.
Absolutely, very interesting questions, and I'm a big fan of your podcast and the work as well, so please keep continuing it.
Thank you so much. So that was my conversation with Vishal Vasanth. That was a really fascinating chat and I learnt a lot. Closing this episode with an excerpt from Vishal's book narrated by him. I hope you enjoyed the show and I'll see you next week with a new guest and a new chronicle to share. Talk soon!
So I'm gonna read out for all of you one of the last parts of my book, which somehow ties to the title and somehow ties to the what the entire book's about. So here it goes. Within this din of noises on educational access, quality, and equity in education lies an essential debate of who deserves what. Firm affirmative action in India, with jobs and educational seats reserved for people from historically marginalized sections of Indian society, has caused severe distress within the upper caste, middle class, and the privileged, who often feel that there's no scope for them to work within the system. The school that I studied in reinforced that belief as well. The closer I came to high school, the narrative seemed to suddenly change, as if a rug was pulled off from beneath your feet. The focus was on academics till middle school, but the pressure was relatively low. Well, once we came to high school, the narrative that the upper caste has no place anywhere within the system and that private markets for education were the only way out to escape the tyranny of the quota system in India became an everyday topic. Worried parents huddled around each other discussing options in astronomical private universities' fees. Teachers put more effort into the more meritorious students. The few serious students doubled down on their efforts to score better to ensure that they could still get in within the system. And the beleaguered rest decided that none of this makes sense, perhaps knowing that their parents would figure a way out. While this is not a debate on the justifications of affirmative action in India, I brought it up to show the gross inequality in educational quality across the country, and if one can actually argue that everyone is on a level playing field. By continuously peddling the myth of meritocracy in a neoliberalized world, where opportunities are getting farther and farther out of reach, the politics of education becomes a politics of humiliation, where regret and comparisons are constantly provoked. The politics of affirmative action aside, the politics of education in India is a politics of humiliation, primarily because a small group of people are being educated to reap the benefits of hyperglobalization and can consider themselves economic entrepreneurs. In contrast, a very large group of people are being left defenseless to the expansion of markets due to a massive learning crisis, amongst a whole host of other factors. As the philosopher Zygmunt Bauman points out, the most consequential dimension of the planetary wide expansion of capital has been the slow yet relentless globalization of the production of human waste, or more precisely, wasted humans. Humans no longer necessary for the completion of the economic cycle, and thus impossible to accommodate within a social framework resonant within a capitalist economy.